All right, so ready to dive in. Today, it's all about translation. But not just casually knowing a second language, we're talking about what it takes to be a translation agency manager. Maybe you're thinking about a career move, or maybe you, like me, have a cousin who works with languages, and you still don't know what that means.
It's honestly fascinating, right? You've got languages, obviously, but also business strategy, technology, and this surprisingly big human element that still matters even with all the tech we have.
Speaking of, we've got our trusty stack of RoleCatcher guides right here, ready to break down everything from AI-powered job interviews to what this whole career path actually looks like.
And it's a lot more than just being fluent, that's for sure. We're talking managing teams, really understanding what flies in different cultures. It's high-stakes communication on a global level.
Okay, see, that's what throws me off. RoleCatcher describes the role as overseeing operations in the delivery of translation services. I don't know, feels kind of vague, right? Like, there's got to be more to it than just being able to speak another language, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's much bigger than that. Imagine this. A company's launching a huge product, right?
Right.
But they want to do it in Japan. A bad translation there, that's not just a grammar mistake. It could completely sink their campaign. Could even be offensive. That's why a specialized medical translator or someone who really knows legal jargon, they're worth their weight in gold.
Wow, I never even thought about it like that. Suddenly, this whole cultural nuance thing is making a lot more sense. So it's not just about being technically correct, but also culturally on point. What else makes a translation agency manager really stand out?
RoleCatcher really emphasizes specialization. They talk about legal translations, medical, technical, the list goes on and on. It's less about being a jack of all trades with languages and more like becoming a master of one specific thing. Like imagine being the person for translating ancient Sanskrit texts. How cool would that be?
That's niche. You'd definitely be in demand. Though you'd think this would be like all linguistics majors, right? But Rollcatcher mentions business administration, project management.
It's the whole package deal. Clients, they have deadlines, budgets, and they need someone who gets their industry, not just their language. The guide actually breaks down these core abilities,
Yeah.
things like active listening, negotiation, which honestly, those are useful for anything, not just translation.
So you're not just translating languages, you're translating between what the client needs and what your team can actually deliver. It's almost like being a conductor, keeping all those different parts moving together.
That's a great way to put it. And what I find fascinating is RoleCatcher lays out this whole career ladder. You can start as a translator, then senior translator, move up to project manager, and eventually you're running the whole agency.
Hold on, wait, they even have interview guides in these? Are those real questions, the kind that really make you think?
Oh, yeah, totally. Like, how do you make sure translations are culturally sensitive, or how do you handle conflicts with clients? Honestly, this stuff's pure gold. Even if you're just trying to, sound smart at a party, not even for a job interview.
Okay, that's brilliant. I'm totally using that cultural sensitivity one next time I'm out. But they keep mentioning this active listening thing. What's so special about it in this field? I mean, it seems kind of obvious, right?
You'd think so, right? But think about it. In this job, you're swimming in languages, subtle differences in meaning. Really hearing and understanding your clients, your team, that's absolutely crucial. One wrong word in a legal document, a medical report, that could be huge.
Oh, yeah, no kidding. Suddenly it's not just words, it's like you're translating meaning, intent, even emotions sometimes. And Rollcatcher really stresses that, especially when they talk about global marketing.
Exactly. Getting a translation right, it's not just about the dictionary definition. It's about conveying the right message, the tone even. And of course, those cultural nuances we keep coming back to. Something totally harmless here could be seriously offensive somewhere else. Talk about a PR nightmare.
You said it. You mentioned global marketing campaigns earlier. I'm really starting to see how high the stakes are in this job. Imagine some tagline meant to be funny and lighthearted here, but in another culture, it's just awful.
It happens more than you'd think. That's why a good translation agency manager, they're making sure their team isn't just translating words, but that cultural understanding too. They're like linguistic diplomats,
Yes.
right? Making sure everyone's on the same page no matter what language they speak.
So let me get this straight. You got to be a language expert, a cultural ambassador, a project manager. Am I missing anything?
You forgot master negotiator.
Oh, right, of course. Because you've got client expectations, budgets, deadlines. That is a lot to juggle.
No doubt it's a high-pressure role.
Yeah.
But it's also incredibly rewarding. You're literally making global communication happen, helping businesses connect with people all over the world in a way that really lands, that builds trust. There's something pretty special about that.
And RoleCatcher makes it clear this industry is just getting bigger. Globalization, everyone needing to connect, translation is essential. But let's be real for a sec. AI is everywhere now. Even RoleCatcher has a whole thing about beating AI recruiters. So how does that all fit in? Is AI a threat or a tool in the translation world?
The million-dollar question, right? Honestly. It's more complicated than just a yes or no.
Okay, now you've got me really curious. Let's unpack that right after this quick break. We'll be right back with more on this fascinating world of translation and the impact of AI right here on The Deep Dive. And we're back, diving right back into the world of languages and this whole globalization thing.
Yeah.
Before the break, we were kind of teasing this AI question. Is it a friend or foe for someone working in translation?
Right. And RoleCatcher actually does a good job at showing both sides of that. So on the one hand, we've got these AI translation tools, and they're getting better all the time. But, and this is important, they still don't quite have that human touch, that ability to understand nuance, cultural context, all the stuff we were talking about before.
It's like those AI-generated images everyone's talking about, right?
Yeah.
Super impressive, technically. But then you zoom in, and it's like, wait, that hand has 7 fingers. A human artist would never do that.
Exactly. And in the translation world, a mistake like that, it's a lot more serious than a weird hand in a picture. Think about legal contracts, medical diagnoses. You do not want to trust an AI to get those right.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So it sounds like human translators aren't going anywhere anytime soon, which is good news. But what about these AI recruiters? RoleCatcher mentions them a lot.
And that's where it gets really interesting. Remember how we were saying specialization is key? Turns out AI can actually help you figure out what to specialize in. There are these tools now that can actually analyze job postings and figure out like what the most in-demand language pairs are, what areas of expertise are really hot right now.
Wait, so you're saying I could take my resume, feed it to an AI, and I'll be like, hey, you speak French and you did some marketing stuff in college. Maybe look into luxury brand translation. That's way better than just using a thesaurus.
Exactly. It's like having a personalized career counselor who's read every job description out there. And it's not just about the languages. These AI tools can tell you what skills are hot right now, certifications you could get, all based on what's happening in the job market at this very moment.
Okay, that's honestly a game changer, like having a secret weapon in this crazy competitive job market. But AI aside, there's still this whole career ladder thing. You don't just start out as the boss, right?
Not usually, no. And that's where those real-life stories in RoleCatcher are super useful. They've got people from all different stages of their careers, which really gives you a feel for what it actually takes to move up in this field.
Okay, so let's break it down then. Someone's just starting out, right? Totally in love with languages, wants to make a career out of it. What does that first step look like?
Well, a lot of times it starts with being a translator. You're really honing your craft, becoming this linguistic chameleon,
Yeah.
capturing the soul of the words in another language.
Right, you're not just bilingual, you're bilingual. And RoleCatcher made a point of saying translators need to be great writers and editors in both languages, which makes sense.
Huge point. One little comma out of place, one word that's just slightly off, that can totally change the meaning. Translators need to be masters of both languages, making sure everything is accurate, clear, and of course, we can't forget, culturally appropriate.
Talk about attention to detail. And speaking of, RoleCatcher mentions that a lot of translators specialize in certain types of texts. What are we talking about here? Just marketing stuff, or is it broader than that?
Oh, way broader. Legal documents, for example. Completely different skill set there. Think about it. Mistranslating a legal contract, that could be disastrous.
Yeah.
Then there's medical translation. Imagine having to translate medical reports, patient records. The margin for error is tiny.
Wow, I never even considered all those specialized areas. You're not just translating a language, you're translating an entire field of knowledge at that point.
Exactly. And that's why the best in this business, they're lifelong learners, constantly trying to learn new things. But it's not just the technical stuff, it's that cultural awareness we keep talking about. You got to have both.
Okay, so you've been a translator for a while now. You've really honed your skills, built your reputation, maybe even used some AI to figure out a niche. What's the next step up that career ladder?
Often it means taking on more responsibility. Maybe you're mentoring newer translators, managing some smaller projects. RoleCatcher calls this the senior translator phase. You're sharing your expertise, but also starting to think more strategically about the whole translation process.
So it's less about you and your dictionaries in a quiet room and more about being a team player.
Exactly. And if that's something you're good at and you enjoy it, the next step is usually becoming a translation project manager.
Okay, so what does a project manager do all day?
Imagine you're conducting an orchestra. But instead of musicians, You've got this team of translators,
Mm.
each one with their own specialties, their own little quirks. You're responsible for the whole project, from start to finish, making sure you understand what the client needs, getting the right people on the team, setting deadlines, making sure the quality is top-notch, and of course, delivering everything on time and within budget.
Sounds like a high wire act, honestly. Linguistic precision, cultural sensitivity, and regular old business deadlines all at the same time.
That's one way to put it. But for the right person, it's incredibly rewarding. You're the bridge between languages, between cultures. You're the one making sure nothing, and I mean nothing, gets lost in translation.
And then finally, you reach the peak translation agency manager. What's that like, based on what RoleCatcher says?
Well, at that point, you're not just managing projects, you're managing the whole agency. Setting the overall strategy, making the big business decisions, building relationships with clients, and creating a company culture that values both linguistic excellence and cultural sensitivity. It's a lot.
So it's like being the CEO of a tiny United Nations, but your product is communication itself.
I love that analogy. You're literally building bridges of understanding, one word at a time.
This whole conversation is really giving me a whole new respect for what goes into translation. Every time I see a website in another language, a translated document, there is so much happening behind the scenes. And we're back, ready to wrap up this deep dive into the world of translation. You know, it's funny.
What's that?
We started off talking about AI, all these high-tech tools.
Right.
But going through everything from RoleCatcher,
Yeah.
it really hits you just how much of this job is about, well, human connection.
It really is.
Yeah.
And as good as AI is getting, like churning out words on a screen,
Right.
it's never going to be able to replace that human touch. A translator who gets the culture, the humor,
Yeah.
those little things that make a message really land.
Totally. I mean, I can see a machine translating, like, a set of instructions, maybe.
Maybe, yeah.
But a script for a comedy film, forget it. Something's getting lost in translation there, for
Right.
sure.
Oh, 100%. And not just comedies. Think about translating a book
Oh, yeah.
where the author's using really specific word choices, building a certain atmosphere.
Right, the tone.
Exactly. And AI might get the basic meaning, but it's going to miss all that subtlety.
Which I guess is fine if you just need to get the gist of something.
Sure, for like a quick news article.
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
But when it's something with feeling, something that needs to connect on a deeper level, that's where humans are still essential.
Speaking of connecting, that reminds me of this marketing campaign I saw a while back. They'd obviously just run their tagline through some AI translator,
Uh-oh.
and it did not translate well. Let's just say that.
What happened?
It ended up being really awkward, totally missed the mark, not at all the vibe they were going for.
Yeah, you see that all the time. Companies trying to save a buck, I guess.
Right.
But they end up looking tone deaf.
Totally. And that's a prime example of what you were saying, right? Speed over accuracy, forgetting about that cultural piece.
Exactly. A good translation agency manager, their team, they would have caught that right away. They'd know that sometimes a direct translation just doesn't cut it.
They'd be like, hold up. In this culture, that phrase means something totally different and not in a good way.
Exactly. It's all about understanding those unspoken rules, the cultural references, but
Yeah.
the things you wouldn't even think about unless you really knew.
So they're not just translating a language, they're translating like meaning and intent.
Yes. Bridging that gap between cultures, making sure everyone's understanding each other.
Which, honestly, in the world we live in today, that feels more important than ever.
Couldn't agree more. The world's only getting more interconnected, right? Businesses, they need to be able to talk to people all over, build those relationships.
And that's where translation becomes key.
Absolutely. It's not just about swapping out words anymore. It's about building trust, creating a connection that goes beyond language.
It's like that old saying, the world is a book, and those who don't travel only read one page. But in this case, it's more like, the world is a conversation, and those who only speak one language are missing out on most of it.
Beautifully put. And as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of translation, I think that's a pretty perfect note to end on.
It really is. So to all our listeners out there, whether you're language enthusiasts, AI aficionados, or just curious minds eager to learn something new, we hope this episode has given you a glimpse into this fascinating and ever-evolving field.
And hey, who knows? Maybe it's even sparked an interest in exploring a career in translation yourself.
Until next time, keep those curiosity gears turning, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.